It has been rough, as it would be for anyone revisiting a situation like this.
Tupac's brother just reacted to his murder trial, a case that took 3 decades to reach a courtroom. This case sat cold for years, witnesses disappeared, and the people who knew what happened stayed quiet, while one of the most famous unsolved murders in music history remained exactly unresolved. Now that has changed. A man has been charged, a courtroom is ready, and the brother who stood alongside Tupac during the most important years of his life just told the world exactly how he feels about all of it. What he said is going to hit different than anything you have heard about this case before, because this is not coming from a journalist or an analyst or someone who read about it. This is coming from a man who lived it. The shocking truth behind how this case finally made it to trial is more complicated and more compelling than most people realize, and we are about to reveal it all. Stay with us.
Just being cautiously optimistic, let the process take its course.
Yo, what's good, fam? We about to dive deep into some real street drama and industry politics that has been shaking up the hip-hop community for going on 30 years. This one hits different because we are not talking about a cold case anymore. Jury selection in the murder trial of Dwayne Keith D. Davis began on August 10th, 2026. The trial is happening right now, and Tupac's brother has something to say about it. Let's get into it. Now, before we get into this wild ride, let me keep it 100 with y'all. There has been so much noise around Tupac's murder for so long that it can be hard to separate what is real from what is rumor. But yo, we about to lay out the documented facts, the confirmed quotes, the actual evidence that is walking into that courtroom, and why Mopreme Shakur's reaction to all of it is the emotional center of the biggest hip-hop criminal trial in history. Maurice Shakur, known as Mopreme, is Tupac's older stepbrother. He was not just a grieving family member watching from the sidelines. He was in the trenches with Tupac. He rapped under Thug Life. He was part of the Outlaws. Tupac gave him the stage name Kamani, which speaks to the depth of the bond they had as brothers and as collaborators in the same creative world. Mopreme was in the room when the music was being made. He was on the records. He was part of the movement that Tupac was building in real time during the most important run of his career. And when Tupac was killed in September 1996, Mopreme did not just lose a brother. He lost a creative partner, a collaborator, and the center of a world they had been building together. Now hold up before y'all start thinking this is just another Tupac retrospective. This is about what is happening right now in a courtroom, why it took 30 years to get here, and why Mopreme's 2-word reaction to the whole situation tells you everything you need to know about what this family has been carrying. But here is where it gets real spicy. So check it, September 7, 1996. That is the date that changed everything. Tupac was in Las Vegas for the Mike Tyson and Bruce Seldon boxing match at the MGM Grand. He was riding with Death Row Records co-founder Suge Knight in an entourage that included security and close associates. This was peak Tupac, post-prison, all eyes on me, already out and certified. Death Row at its commercial height. He was the biggest rapper alive at that moment, and everybody in the building that night knew it. After the fight, a confrontation broke out inside the casino involving Tupac's crew and a man named Orlando Anderson, who went by Baby Lane. Anderson was the nephew of Dwayne Davis, known to the streets and to the culture as Keith D, a shot caller in the Southside Compton Crips. That confrontation inside the MGM Grand was captured on surveillance footage. Word moved fast through both camps about what had gone down that night. Hours later, Tupac and Knight were traveling in a BMW near East Flamingo Road and Culver Lane, about a block off the Las Vegas Strip, when a white Cadillac pulled alongside the vehicle and gunfire erupted. Tupac was struck 4 times. Knight was wounded but survived. 6 days later, on September 13, 1996, Tupac Shakur died at University Medical Center. He was 25 years old. And the investigation that followed would take 30 years to produce a single arrest. Now, before we get deeper into what happened that night, let's talk about who Keith D actually is, because a lot of people only know his name from the headlines and not the actual history. Dwayne Davis grew up in Compton, California, and rose to become a senior figure in the Southside Compton Crips during a period when that organization had significant reach and influence across Southern California. Shot callers and gang structures are not foot soldiers. They are decision makers. They carry the authority to authorize serious actions on behalf of the organization, and the people below them in the structure follow those decisions. That is the role prosecutors are alleging Davis occupied when they say he gave the order that ended Tupac's life. And the reason Davis was even in Las Vegas that night matters to the prosecution's theory. According to grand jury transcripts, the Southside Compton Crips had a working relationship with Bad Boy Records, the label founded by Sean Combs that included the notorious B.I.G. and represented the East Coast side of a coastal beef that had been dominating hip-hop for the better part of 2 years. Hundreds of pages of those grand jury documents portray Tupac's shooting as a culmination of long-standing tension between rival record labels and rival gang factions. That is the broader context that prosecutors are expected to lay out for the jury before they get to the evidence specific to Davis. Now in the streets and in hip-hop, we know that when something goes down involving gang-affiliated individuals, the response does not always wait for morning. Retaliation moves fast. Decisions get made quickly by people with the authority to make them. But Tupac's situation was different because what prosecutors allege is that the killing was not random and was not purely emotional. It was allegedly organized retaliation tied to gang structure, planned and executed within hours of that confrontation inside the MGM Grand. Prosecutors have described Keith D as the on-ground, on-site commander who ordered the death of Tupac Shakur. The theory is that Davis, as a senior shot caller with the authority to authorize serious action within the Southside Compton Crips, allegedly used that position to organize the response to what happened with his nephew. And here is what makes this case genuinely different from most cold case prosecutions. Davis himself spent years publicly telling pieces of this story, in documentaries, in podcasts, in interviews on camera and on the record with his face showing and his name attached, and in a 2019 memoir called Compton Street Legend, where he described being inside the white Cadillac on the night of the shooting and his alleged role in supplying the firearm to the people in the back seat. That is some real talk right there. The man prosecutors say organized the killing of Tupac Shakur put details of the story in a published book, available for anyone to read. And that book, along with everything else Davis said across more than a decade of public appearances, is now sitting in the prosecution's evidence file, waiting to be introduced to the jury. But here is where it gets interesting, because Davis's defense team has been working overtime to walk all of that back. They argued the memoir was written for entertainment purposes and that the statements inside it were not meant to be treated as genuine admissions in a court of law. They argued the public interviews were financially motivated. They floated the ghostwriter defense, claiming Davis did not personally author those passages and that the credibility of the book as a source of evidence was being misrepresented by the prosecution. That entire strategy started falling apart before the trial even began. A jail call Davis made to his mistress just days after his September 2023 arrest was obtained, and prosecutors planned to introduce it at trial. In that 7-minute recording, Davis admitted to writing the memoir himself. He contradicted his own legal team's central argument in a phone call from a jail. The conversation was made before Davis had fully assembled his defense strategy, capturing him speaking candidly with someone he trusted, and it is now going to be played in open court for the jury to hear. Let that sink in for a minute. The ghostwriter defense collapsed because of a recorded phone call to a mistress made within days of the arrest. That is the kind of development that reshapes a trial before a single witness ever takes the stand. The real kicker, though, is how much evidence prosecutors have assembled around Davis's own words across multiple separate timelines. On top of the memoir and the jail call, there is a 2008 recorded police interview that a judge ruled admissible before the trial began, and that ruling was a major prosecution win. Davis gave that 2008 interview while in conversations with authorities connected to a separate federal drug trafficking investigation. At the time, Davis believed he had some level of protection through proffer agreements he had entered into with both federal and local officials. His legal team argued that those immunity-adjacent negotiations should have been enough to keep the recording out of court. The judge disagreed and ruled that it comes in. So now jurors are going to hear what Davis told investigators in 2008, which was more than a decade after the murder, before his memoir was published, and before he went on his documentary and podcast circuit, talking publicly about the case. Having a recorded statement from 2008, a published memoir from 2019, and a jail call from 2023 gives prosecutors 3 separate points in time where Davis's own voice connects into the events of September 1996. That is a pattern across 15 years of statements that is very hard to argue around, regardless of what the defense says about any individual piece of it. Now let me break down for y'all why the full picture of evidence matters beyond just the recordings. Because this ain't just about what Davis said to cameras and investigators. When authorities arrested Davis in September 2023, they executed a search of his home and seized electronic devices, hard drives, photographs, and ammunition, including .40 caliber rounds. For those who might not understand why physical evidence matters in a case built largely around statements, here is the breakdown. Recorded statements establish what a defendant allegedly knew and what they claim to have done. Physical evidence gives prosecutors something tangible to place alongside those statements, something that exists in the real world independent of what anyone said or wrote. Items seized from a defendant's home provide corroborating context and give jurors something concrete to anchor to when they evaluate whether the defendant's own words should be believed. And then there is the MGM Grand surveillance footage from the night of September 7th, 1996. Prosecutors are expected to use that footage to show the confrontation between Tupac's crew and Orlando Anderson, establish the alleged motive for what followed hours later, and walk the jury through the sequence of events that allegedly set the entire night in motion. Instead of asking jurors to imagine what happened inside that casino based on testimony alone, prosecutors can show them. That footage gives the entire trial a visual foundation that connects the alleged motive to the prosecution's timeline in a way that is difficult to dismiss. Now, this ain't just about one piece of evidence working on its own. The real strength of what prosecutors are bringing into that courtroom is how all of these elements connect and build toward a single coherent picture. The MGM Grand surveillance footage establishes the confrontation that allegedly created the motive. The 2008 recorded police interview connects Davis directly to knowledge of the killing at a time when he was speaking to investigators long before any book deal or camera appearance existed. The Compton Street Legend memoir puts Davis's own account of being inside the Cadillac and providing the weapon into print under his name. The jail call to his mistress confirms he wrote the memoir himself and takes the ghostwriter argument off the table. The years of documentary appearances and podcast interviews create a multi-decade archive of public self-implication that prosecutors can use to show this was not a one-time slip, but a sustained pattern across many different contexts over many years. Davis appeared in multiple film documentaries about Tupac's murder and discussed his alleged involvement across different interview formats with different interviewers, which means prosecutors have a library of material that was produced independently of any single publication deal or media arrangement. Inconsistencies between different accounts, details that shifted across versions, and admissions that carry through multiple tellings all become potential prosecution tools when a case is built around the defendant's own statements. And the physical evidence seized from his home in 2023 ties the historical record to the present with something real that investigators can point to. Prosecutors have established that Davis is the only person who was inside the vehicle that night who is still alive. The person most widely believed to have pulled the trigger, Orlando Anderson, died in an unrelated gang shooting in 1998. Davis is not charged with pulling the trigger. He is charged as the organizer, the commander, the shot caller who allegedly set the attack in motion and provided the weapon. Under Nevada law, a person who provides meaningful assistance to a killing and acts with the intent to cause death can be held criminally responsible even without personally firing a single shot. And the gang enhancement attached to the charge frames the entire alleged killing as an act carried out to promote or assist a criminal gang, which affects both the legal weight of everything Davis is accused of doing and the potential consequences he faces if convicted. The real question, though, is whether all of that is enough to get 12 jurors past reasonable doubt. And fam, here is where the case gets genuinely complicated, because having a mountain of evidence and actually winning a criminal trial are two very different things. The prosecution's entire theory rests on a framework that the defense is going to attack from every angle. They are going to argue that Davis made public statements for money, not because they were true. They are going to argue that the 2008 police interview was given under conditions that make it unreliable as evidence. They are going to argue that the memoir was entertainment, not confession. And they are going to argue that 30 years of aging memories and dead witnesses make it impossible for any jury to reach a verdict beyond a reasonable doubt about events that happened 3 decades ago. The defense raised a new witness from a private investigator who they say can place Davis outside of Las Vegas entirely on the night of the shooting. That argument might not carry the day given everything else on the evidence table, but even one juror who finds that credible is enough to prevent a conviction. That is the reality of how criminal trials work. and no amount of public statements or archived footage changes the fundamental math of requiring unanimous agreement from 12 people. Keith D rejected a plea deal ahead of the trial and went on record insisting he is innocent, saying he never committed the crime and that God has his back. His defense team has spent years arguing that his prior statements were produced under the assumption of immunity, driven by financial incentive, or too unreliable across their many versions to carry the legal weight prosecutors want to give them. They raised the possibility that Davis was not even in Las Vegas on the night of the shooting, citing new witness testimony from a private investigator. The case was delayed from its original June 2024 trial date all the way through multiple postponements before finally landing on August 10, 2026. Davis appeared in court the week before jury selection, asking for yet another delay, telling the judge he was close to posting bail. The judge said no, but here is what fam needs to understand about how criminal trials actually work. The defense does not need to prove Davis is innocent. They only need one juror to have reasonable doubt. 30 years is a long time. Memories shift, witnesses die, accounts evolve and change across decades. Statements made across a decade of public appearances for books and cameras and podcasts can be challenged one by one in a courtroom where strict evidentiary rules apply. The prosecution has a formidable amount of material, but getting every piece of that material past defense challenges and into the minds of 12 specific jurors in a way that survives their deliberations is a different challenge entirely from simply having the better argument on paper. Now, let's talk about what cautiously optimistic actually means, coming from a man in Mopreem's position, because those two words are doing a lot of heavy lifting. Think about what the Shakur family has had to watch over the past 30 years. Every documentary that made Tupac's murder into entertainment, every conspiracy theory that circulated with no accountability attached to it, every anniversary that brought more retrospectives and tributes while the case sat cold, every year that passed with Orlando Anderson dead, with witnesses gone, with the people who knew what happened either unwilling to talk or unavailable. Mopreem spoke directly to CNN on the eve of the trial and made clear that waiting nearly 30 years for any kind of accountability has been exhausting and deeply stressful for the entire family. He did not dress that up. He said it plainly, and he was equally honest about what sitting through the trial is going to cost him emotionally, describing it as incredibly rough and re-traumatizing to revisit the events of September 1996 in a courtroom setting. But he is still going. He is still showing up. And that willingness to go through something he already knows will re-traumatize him says more about what this moment means to him than any quote ever could. Cautious optimism is not negativity. It is wisdom earned through 30 years of waiting. At the end of the day, Mopreem Shakur's reaction to all of this is not just a pull quote in a news article. It is the human reality that sits underneath the entire case. When he described himself as cautiously optimistic, he was not speaking as a commentator or an analyst. He was speaking as a man who rapped alongside his brother, watched him get buried at 25 years old, and spent 30 years without a courtroom, without a verdict, and without any official accountability for what happened on East Flamingo Road. He has been clear that even if a conviction comes, that is not complete justice. Real justice, in his own framing, would mean having Tupac back alive. And that is fundamentally unattainable. No verdict changes that. What he lost was not just a sibling. He lost a career partner, a creative collaborator, and a political voice in music whose commentary on war, poverty, and inequality remains tragically relevant to this day. That double loss, the personal and the cultural, is what Mopreem has been carrying for 30 years while the world turned Tupac's murder into content. He said the last 30 years have been exhausting and stressful for his family. He said the trial will be re-traumatizing. He used the phrase, "strange days we are living in." Let the process take its course and see where we land. That is what grief sounds like after 3 decades with no resolution. And alongside all of that pain, Mopreem has made clear that even a conviction would not close every chapter he needs closed. In April 2026, he filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Keith D and several unnamed co-conspirators, with his attorneys asserting that the plot to kill Tupac extends far beyond the 4 individuals who were inside that Cadillac. The lawsuit heavily cites grand jury transcripts and investigative material linking Sean Combs to an alleged bounty placed on Tupac and Suge Knight. Combs has always denied any involvement in Tupac's murder and is currently detained on unrelated federal charges. But for Mopreem, One defendant sitting in Las Vegas is not the full picture of what happened to his brother, and he is not going to pretend otherwise. Real talk, this trial is bigger than one criminal case and bigger than one verdict. Think about what it means for hip-hop to finally have a defendant sitting in a courtroom for one of the culture's most famous unsolved murders. For decades, the idea that anyone would ever face criminal charges for Tupac's death felt like something that was never going to happen. The witnesses were dying. The investigation was cold. The people who knew what happened had every reason not to talk and almost no reason to cooperate. Then Keith D started talking publicly for years, and prosecutors found a way to use his own words against him. The 2023 arrest shocked people who had given up on ever seeing an arrest happen. And now the trial itself is underway. Whether it ends in conviction or acquittal, something that hip-hop spent 30 years saying would never come to trial is now in a courtroom. That matters in itself. The real question going forward is what this trial means not just for one family, but for hip-hop history and for the culture at large. Tupac's music has not faded in the 30 years since his death. It has grown. His influence on hip-hop, on political thought, on conversations about race and inequality in the criminal justice system has expanded with every passing year. He released music that continues to connect with people who were not alive when he died. His commentary on American life was specific enough to feel immediate in its own historical moment and broad enough to remain relevant to conditions that have not fundamentally changed. The unresolved nature of his murder has followed his legacy like a shadow, keeping this case alive in the cultural consciousness long after most cold case stories disappear from memory. This trial is now the moment where that 30-year question gets tested in a real courtroom with real evidence in front of a real jury. Prosecutors will build their case around Davis's own voice across 3 decades of recordings and public appearances. The defense will attack the reliability of every statement he ever made, and Shakur will sit in that courtroom carrying all of it, holding on to something he described in exactly 2 words: cautiously optimistic. What are your thoughts on Mopreem's reaction and where this trial is headed? Drop it in the comments and click on the content on screen for more from the Rap Lane.